If you have your Bibles, I want to look at Psalms 90. Psalms 90. I'm going to talk from this whole chapter, but just reading our hearings, Psalms 90 and verse 12. If you have it, say amen.
Amen.
Need us to wait, say wait. We're all there together. It reads, so teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. You may be seated. I want to talk about counting correctly. Counting correctly. If you look at this verse closely, he starts off with, so teach us, which lets me know that there have been some things said before we get to verse 12. He says, so teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. I named it this, or titled it this, Counting Correctly, because there are many people that don't count correctly. If we look around, people are still in their foolishness because they have not counted correctly. If you look at the youth, and not only the youth, even the adults, of
Amen.
how we are living in these days and times,
Yes, sir.
it's because they have not counted correctly. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. And you have to remember to live life as if it's your last day living.
Sir.
He gives us some guidelines to follow in order to count correctly. If we go back up to verse 1, he first deals with the immortality of God. Turn me down a little bit, Josh. He deals with the immortality of God, and immortality is simply this, that God cannot die. Are y'all in here?
Yes, amen.
Which means this, that there is no end to God. God has no ending because God has no beginning. He has always been. You can tell this in verse 1 because he uses the title Lord. When he uses that title Lord, what he is talking about, he is talking about the sovereignty of God. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is simply this, that God super rules.
Amen.
That means that his rule is above anybody else's rule.
Yes.
No matter what is going on in life, if you're going to count correctly, you have to understand that God is still in charge.
Amen.
No matter what life looks like, no matter what circumstances you are facing, no matter how you see other people cutting up, whether they're in your household or outside of your household, you have to remember that God still rules.
Amen.
And And that's significant because if you don't realize that God rules, you'll try to take matters into your own hand.
Amen.
When you realize that God rules, you won't give up the ship so quickly, and you won't throw in the white towel because you understand that God still sits on the throne.
Yes.
That's when you realize that God is sovereign.
Yes.
And when his rule is above everybody else's rule, that means that even when Satan launches his attacks, you can still keep holding on to God because you know that God is going to win in the end, because I understand that God is sovereign.
Amen.
He says you have to realize the immortality of God. He says one of the first things of the immortality of God is that God is sovereign.
Amen.
Still looking at verse 1, after he says, Lord, he then says, thou hast been our dwelling place. Not only is God sovereign, but God is our safety.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
See, because when the storms of life come, you ought to be thankful that you have somewhere safe
Amen.
to go.
Amen.
And can I tell you that some people, and that's why people are not counting correctly, because they have not looked at the immortality of God, that God is sovereign, and then God is our safe place.
Yes, he is.
So that means trouble can only go so far. He did not promise us that we would not have trouble, but he did say that he will protect us within the trouble. Are y'all in here?
Yeah.
And I don't know how you feel about it, but the people of God have a safe haven in God. When he says that thou art our dwelling place, what he's really talking about is that God is our refuge. He is our refuge and our rescue. So whenever the floods are rising, and whenever the storm is coming, and whenever the wind is blowing hard, you've got to realize that you have somebody that you can go into and be safe. That's why the church or Christians should not act like the world when we face trouble, because we have a God.
Yes.
And that we have safety within our God. And we know that our God is sovereign, so no matter what is going on, we know what the end is.
Yes, amen.
He says not only is God sovereign, God is our safety, but then he talks about God's sight. If you know the attributes of God, God is everywhere.
Yes, he is.
All at the same time. God is all-knowing.
Yes, he is.
And God is all-powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Reverend, what about God's sight is that you might not see what is coming. You might not see the future, but God can see it.
Yes, he can.
And sometimes you've got to trust the Lord. Let me change that. All the time, you've got to trust God's sight and not your sight.
Amen.
That's why it says we walk by faith and not by sight. And when you're following God, you got to just follow God, even though you don't know what's down the road. But Lord, I'm following you because I know that your sight is excellent. You see everything. You already know before it happens. You've already worked it out before it happens. And when you realize that God has super sight, you'll keep on going.
Oh, yes.
He says you got to
Amen.
understand the immortality of God. He says in these verses, Lord, you're from everlasting to everlasting. That means that God is not consumed by time.
Amen.
I say this all the time, that God reaches his hand and steps over into time to work some things out for us, but God is not consumed by time. That's why he's not in a rush.
Yeah.
Are y'all in here? We get in a rush. And a lot of times when we get in a rush, and the reason why we get in a rush is because we're not trusting God, we're panicking and we're trying to work it out and we're trying to give it a quick fix.
Yeah.
But can I tell you that there are some things that can't be fixed quickly, but it takes time. It's a process, and you just got to trust God within the process.
Amen.
He says you got to understand the immortality of God. There is no end to God.
No, it's not.
He's everlasting. He holds the world in the palm of his hand. And surely if he can hold the weight of the world and the heavens, surely he can hold your situation.
Yes, he can.
He not only deals with the immortality of God. I know y'all will get quiet right here. Not only does he deal with that, but we have to deal with it because it's within the text. Not only does he deal with the immortality of God, but then he deals with the immoralness of us.
Amen. That's true.
It's in the text. In verse 8, you've got to realize what's going on is that these Israelites, they are seeing the wrath of God. Are y'all in here? And a lot of times you got to understand why some of the things are going on that are going on in these days and time is because there are a lot of things that are going on that are displeasing to God. And God has to correct that, and sometimes he sends out his anger with wrath. I know we serve a precious God, but God still has a side of him that will become angry, and he will punish us.
Yes, he will.
He deals with our sin. He says if you're going to count correctly, you've got to understand that all of us have some immoralness within us.
Yeah.
And we have some immoralness going on around us. And see, when you count correctly, you'll understand that, Lord, I'm not the finished product, but I'm trying to get there. Lord, just keep working on me. The first thing he deals with is our sin.
Yeah. Amen.
And you got to understand that every day, I told a young man that at work, I said, listen here, the Christian walk is this every day, that you've got to do self-examination.
Yeah. That's true.
See, because if you do self-examination, that don't mean that you don't see the wrong in others, but see, I don't have time really to deal with your stuff because it's a continuous job to deal with my own. Y'all ain't gonna help me. It's a continuous job for me to deal with my own self.
Yeah.
And when you get in the mirror, I said, now watch this. Self-examination is this. It's me comparing myself to Christ. And when you compare yourself to Christ, you see how ugly. I ain't trying to hurt nobody's feelings, but you see how ugly you are in the mirror. And see, what a better place earth would be if folk would realize when they look in the mirror, you ain't got it all together. All your eyes ain't got it, baby. All your teeth ain't closed. You don't have no halo over your head. You don't say everything right. You do things to offend folks. Y'all in here? And you got to realize that you have some sin in your life.
Yes. Amen.
Now, he says, that's our sin. Watch this. He said, not only do we have to deal with our sin, but we have to deal with our sorrow.
Amen.
And the reason why we have sorrow on this earth is because of sin.
Yes. So true.
I know that a lot of us think that sinning is fun. Are y'all in here?
Amen.
Y'all ain't gonna talk. I'll talk by myself. All of us have enjoyed. Can I talk to y'all real good? Yeah. All of us have enjoyed some sinful situations.
Yes. Yes.
Whether you was with somebody, by yourself, whatever it is, all of us have enjoyed some sinful situations. But within the sinful situation, if you're truly saved, it causes sorrow in your heart because you know what you're doing or what you're thinking or what you're talking about is displeasing to God. And you want to please your Father when you truly belong to Him. You don't want to displease your Father. It hurts your feelings as well. Because when you hook up with God, you become sheep. Pigs wallow in mud.
Sheep sometimes fall in mud, but they cry out because they know they don't belong there. And I don't know, if you keep living, you'll find yourself, whether you got yourself there or not, you'll find yourself in situations that will cause sorrow because you hadn't dealt with the sin in your life. You got to deal with it. You got to handle it. You got to turn it over to the Lord. You got to ask the Lord for some help, and then you've got to surrender to his help. And can I tell you, the help don't always feel good. Look, I've been helping my children, right? And sometimes the way I helped them, it was not me giving them no money. It was not me giving them no food, but I helped them with a belt. Y'all in here? I helped them by chastising them. Y'all don't want to talk. See, because now we have become in a day and age where we don't want to correct certain things that need to be corrected. That's why our children are running wild and rapid in the world and say and do anything. I just remember I got to share this. When we were down there and came down there with Daniel Pays a Minute for I Care Enough, and we were down at the Fair Park Arena, and I had to tell some kids, hey, they don't want y'all up there, come down. The majority of the children came down, but there was this little girl, she couldn't have been no older than 14. I don't even think she was 14. She looked at me in my face as if she could spit in my face. And she still didn't move at first. But by her keep looking at me, I started looking at her. And I don't think your look don't look worse than mine. And then finally she moved. But the point I'm bringing out that our children and some of our adults to be so disrespectful, it lets me know that your mama and your dad or whoever is raising you allows you to do those kind of things because you don't even respect those that are elder than you. And the reason why I'm asking you to come off the step and then you're holding a little baby is for your safety, baby. And a lot of times that's what God is telling us. Listen here, come down out of your sin and bow before me because it's displeasing to me, but it's also for your protection because the wages of sin is what? Death.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
He says, and the reason why a lot of times when you turn on the news, it's hard to watch the news now. Because your heart will get so heavy.
Yes, it will.
But the reason why we are facing a lot or have to deal with sorrow is because there is sin in the world. And there is sin in us.
Yes, it is.
He says not only do you have to deal with the mourners of man, he says it's because of our sin and our sorrow, but then he deals with the shortness of our days. The reason why we have to die is because of sin.
Yes.
In God's divine and original plan, Raven, he never intended for us to die.
No, he didn't.
He intended for us to be with him forever.
Yes.
But because man wanted to do his own thing, and decide to go against the will of God, here's the punishment. He says, okay, now you're going to have to die. But yet in your dying, you can be saved. And it reverses the plan that sin caused. Are y'all in here? And he says, I'm still going to win in the end because those that belong to me, although you got to physically die, you don't have to spiritually die. And although you physically die, when you physically die, if you belong to God, then you are back where you first started, which is with God.
Amen. Preach it.
Now that's the Bible.
Yes.
And that's why we have to preach salvation because we don't want nobody to double die. Let me say it again. We don't want nobody to double die.
No, we don't. Amen.
Now, baby, you got to get out of here. All of us going to get old, or whether you struck down in your youth or in your elderness, all of us have to go that way.
Yes.
But what we can do in the job of the church and every Christian is to promote Jesus and say, listen here, all need to be saved.
Amen.
Therefore, you don't have to die twice.
Amen.
He says, you've got to deal with the immortality for God. There is no end to God.
No, it's not.
You've got to deal with your own immoralness. He says, now, after you deal with that, he said you're on your way to counting correctly. But then watch this. And they'll credit this particular psalm to Moses. Moses said, now Lord, I understand that you are immoral. I understand that we have been immoral.
Yes.
Watch this. I hope y'all learn where to shout it. Then he says, now if I'm going to count correctly, he said, then Abbott, what I can do, although Lord, you are immortal, I'm immoral, Lord, I still can send an invitation out to you.
Amen. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Lord.
He says, you can still invite God in.
Yes.
He says, I sent out an invitation to God. Well, what was the invitation? What was he asking God to do for him? He says, first of all, Lord, teach us to number our days so that we can have a wise heart.
Yeah.
He asks God for wisdom. He invites the wisdom of God in his life.
Yeah.
And can I tell you that none of us know everything to do right. There are going to be certain situations where you ain't going to know which way to go, and you got to invite the wisdom of God.
Yeah.
And see, here's the wisdom of God right here. It's right in the word of God.
Yeah.
And God shows us how to handle every situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So therefore, we don't have to make foolish choices because we have the wisdom of God. And every circumstance, every situation that you face, the Bible addresses it.
Yeah.
He says, Lord,
Yeah.
give us wisdom. Well, what is wisdom? It's knowledge.
Yeah.
The Bible says that my people perish for the lack of knowledge. If you look out in this society now, some of them don't even know where we came from. And when you don't know where you came from, you don't know who you truly are.
Yeah.
Now, it goes beyond black history.
Amen. So true.
It goes beyond that. Not that that's something that we shouldn't deal with. Not saying that at all. But it goes beyond that because it goes to this. That I started out with God.
Hallelujah. Glory.
That's where I came from.
Yeah.
In a peaceful, joyful place.
Yeah.
A place where there is no sin.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get back there.
Yes, Lord.
Y'all in here?
Yeah.
He says, you got to have some knowledge.
Yeah.
And the reason why people act the way they do is because they have not come into the full knowledge of the Lord.
Man.
But when you understand that, look here, Lord, if you save me, what I look like wanting to take somebody else's life, I want to give them a chance, Lord, to come into the full knowledge of you.
Yeah.
He says, I invite you, God, to give me some wisdom. He says, Lord, now I understand that you are immoral. And our sins have come up before you.
Yeah.
He says, not only our sins that we do out in public, but even our secret sins. Y'all can read this when you go home, this whole Psalm 9, and you'll see everything that I'm saying here. He said, but even our secret sins, listen here, you can hide from mama and daddy. You can hide from the pastor. You can hide from your boss. You can hide from your wife. You can hide from your husband. You can hide from your children, but you cannot hide from God. There's nothing you can do that God does not know. Matter of fact, he knows you're going to do it before you do it.
Yeah.
And you've got to acknowledge that and know that God can see me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you go into that, that's how you count correctly, because always everything I do and say is before God. And when you understand that, then you will begin to count correctly, because, Lord, I
don't want to do anything that's displeasing to you. And I understand that, Lord, I can't hide from your sight. Look, Adam and Eve tried it. They tried to hide from God. And Satan will have a way of making you ashamed and making you hide. But God said, where are you?
Yeah. Yes, he did.
He said, well, we're hiding. Why you hiding? Because we're naked. God said, who told you that? Can I tell you, that's how sin is. It will embarrass you.
Yes, it will.
It'll get you, it'll tell you come play, and then it'll embarrass you.
Yeah.
And then not only will it embarrass you, then it'll talk about you. Say, you a fool. You didn't know that this came from Satan? You've been playing with me. I ain't none of your friends for real.
Yeah.
He says, teach us wisdom. But he said, Lord, I understand that I can invite you in for wisdom. But then he says, Lord, I can invite you in, even though we messed up, I can invite you in to show some mercy.
Amen.
He says, Lord, we need mercy. We understand that you're a holy God. We understand, Lord, we are immoral. And we have done and said and participated in immoral things.
Yeah.
But Lord, yet and still, we know you. And see, when you know God, when you truly know God, you understand that although I'm messed up, Lord, I still can invite you in for some wisdom. Teach me, Lord. Then he said, Lord, not only I'm asking you to teach me, but Lord, I'm asking you for some mercy.
Yeah.
Well. What is mercy? Mercy is simply this. It's forgiveness.
Yeah.
It's forgiveness that you are asking from someone that is above you, that has the right and the power to punish and harm you.
Yeah.
He said, Lord, now we have seen your wrath. Because it says in the Bible, it says, return, O Lord. In the NIV, it says, relent. He's asking God, Lord, please, stop. And sometimes, listen, when God is chastising you, you have to ask the Lord, please. I don't know if you've ever been there, but Lord, please, Lord, have mercy. I know I deserve it. But Lord, please have mercy on me.
Yeah.
And the reason why you can ask God that, not only that you know God's wrath, but you know God's love.
Yeah.
And you know that God still, although he's chastising you, he still loves you. And you can ask God, Lord, please have mercy on me. Although I don't deserve it, Lord, please have some mercy.
Yeah.
He says, that's the invitation you give to God for wisdom, for mercy. Then watch this. He asks them for one more thing. He asks them for favor. Well, what is favor? Favor is this. It's kindness beyond what is due or usual. Let me say that again. Favor is this. It's kindness beyond what is due or usual. I can end right here. If you've been walking with the Lord, have you had God to do some unusual things in your life?
Yes.
Have you seen God show you unusual kindness?
Oh, yeah.
Y'all don't want to talk.
Yeah.
Have you had God to bless the work of your hands, although you were messed up?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if you can't say nothing to that, let me tell you what he did. He died
Yes, he did.
on the cross
Yes, he did.
for your sins.
Yeah.
That's favor.
Yeah.
That's God doing something unusual. Because he did it so unusual where when he died, he didn't stay dead.
Yeah.
It was unusual for him to get up in 3 days with all power in heaven and earth in his hands. That's unusual. And that's God's favor and forgiveness on our life that he died for us.
Yeah.
He says, teach us.
Teach us, Lord, to number our days.
Yeah.
Teach us, Lord, that the Lord is my shepherd.
Yeah.
I shall not want. Teach us, Lord, that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning.
Yeah.
Teach us, Lord, that the earth is yours and the fullness thereof. Teach us, Lord, that we can depend on you.
Yeah.
Teach us, Lord, that in all our ways, that if we acknowledge you, you'll direct our paths.
Yeah.
Teach us, Lord, because we need to count this thing correctly.
Yeah.
Teach me, Lord, to number my days, that I don't have many, and the days that you have given to me, Lord, I want them to be more of my days pleasing to you than displeasing.
Yeah.
Teach us. You got to count it correctly. You know, it ain't never been no time to play.
That's true.
But more and more, when you look out and see everything that's going on,
Yes, sir.
time to stop playing. Time to stop looking the other way. Time to follow him.
Yes, it is.
People getting out here young, old, middle age, and they're going out here in various ways.
Yes, sir.
Violence, sickness, suicide, car wrecks. And it's not to scare you, but you should live your life in fear. What are you saying, Pastor Brown? Because we know that the scripture says God has not given us the spirit of fear. Not that fear, but the fear of God.
Yes.
That means that, Lord, I reverence you. I acknowledge you.
Amen.
I want to do what's pleasing
Yes.
to you. Count your days
Yes, Lord.
correctly. Because tomorrow is not promised. All you have is right now.
That's right. Amen.
All you have is right now. And when you realize that, Lord, if this is where all I have is right now, let me be doing right in my right now.
Amen.
Help us. And if God gives you tomorrow, that's just another chance
Yes.
to get some more stuff right.
Yes.
Not that you can earn it,
Amen.
but God, I'm not trying to earn salvation, but Lord, I want to at least do what's pleasing in your sight.
Amen.
The doors of the church are open.
Amen.
If you have not accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, now is the time.
Yes.
Told you, tomorrow is not promised to any man. But choose ye this day whom ye will serve. The doors of the church are open. There might be one,
Yes, thank you, Father.
he's waiting, he's willing,
Thank you for your word.
he can do it.
Yes, you can. Yes, you will.
Count your days correctly.